thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, of course.
Fantastic to see you.
Yeah.
So let's start with a few introductions first. So can you tell me a little bit about your role, where you work, and some of your responsibilities?
Sure. So I'm a UX research manager at Miro, and I work in the core team, in particular, Canvas and Collaboration, we call it. And it's where we build all the customer-facing features.
Yeah.
And we had a big launch a couple of days ago.
Congratulations, I saw it. Fantastic.
Thank you so much. And yeah, so basically what I have is a wonderful team of researchers that I make sure that they are set up for success. Mm-hmm. And I also have like a kind of a take on the tools and processes on how we run research at Miro.
Right.
And yeah, I've been at Miro for like almost 3 years now, and I enjoy it so
Fantastic.
much. Yeah.
Fantastic. And so when you talk about making your research team successful, what are some of the considerations that you have in that decision?
That's a very good question. Actually, I want to borrow something that the speaker said yesterday about this, which is, like it's good if you can set the team with predictable ways of working and then let them actually do the work and not think how to do things, right?
Right.
And something very important for that is like, which are the steps that you're following on research?
Yes.
Which in my mind, I always simplify this into planning, recruiting, interacting with users in any of the forms. It can be, like moderated, unmoderated, all those methodologies. And then there is the analysis and the documentation part, right?
Okay.
So as soon as that is kind of clear and the steps are there and you have like a process in place that doesn't have to be completely prescriptive, I think that really helps a lot in kind of helping not just researchers, but also like anyone else on the organization to run their own research.
That's really interesting. And so what you're trying to do is to apply predictability to the repeatable parts of the research process.
Exactly.
When in a research process, which can be quite unpredictable sometimes, particularly when dealing with participants.
Yeah. The last thing you want actually is like when you're in the middle of a research process is to keep asking yourself, oh, now how do I do this? And where do I need to go to do that, right? So we try to kind of eliminate all that by having a playbook that people can rely on in case they kind of lost or they need guidance with a lot of templates and like a step-by-step process on how to do things. And yeah, like there is that part. And of course, there is the other part, which is project by project. You also need to kind of help people prioritize on the most impactful initiatives, right?
Yes.
And that's like has to do more on the planning stage and less about which processes and tools you're using.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are like maybe the most important parts.
That's so interesting. And has that become more of your role, the research enablement and empowerment, become more of your role in a management position, or is it always something that's kind of been a part of? Yeah,
so technically, I hope my manager is not listening to this. I shouldn't be involved that much in research ops, but I'm a passionate of research ops.
Yes.
And I really like how the evolution of tools have been progressing. So before I was much more involved in creating the playbook and like enabling others to run their own research. These days it's more like a side gig. Luckily we have someone in the team who is fully dedicated to this, but I'm constantly there, like not just trying to improve the process we have, but also like evaluating new tools and like deciding what tools and what steps are more crucial to invest in for that to, again, like keep this part predictable and then let us do the actual job.
That makes so much sense. And just to double click on one thing you said around the evolution of tools, could you tell me a little bit about how you've seen tools evolve over time and where you're at now?
Yeah, that's super interesting. I always refer back in my mind to this huge map that I think it was user interviews have been creating during the last years. And yeah, it's growing and growing like every year. It's impossible to keep track at these days. And that's very good news for us because I remember like back in the day, there were like just a couple of tools and they were more like catch-all tools where you had one tool for everything.
Yes.
And then the evolution started to shift into more specialized niche tools.
Right.
Which is amazing from a perspective of the person who's executing the research. But at the same time, if you're an admin and you have to be the one dealing with all those tool providers, it can be a little bit of a nightmare, to be honest.
Right.
But that was like my favorite approach, especially in smaller teams, because you don't have to deal with so many licenses and you don't have to take care of, accesses and all that. But, like now there are tools such as Great Question, for example, that do a little bit of everything or mostly everything at the level of those specialized tools. And yeah, to be honest with you, like it makes our life, admins, much more easier, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting how I think to kind of synthesize, right? It started with a catch-all tool where, tools weren't really there, but it was the only option. Then it kind of exploded into a myriad of tools that were specialized to, from very specific methods or specific parts of the process. You're very familiar with respondent, probably.
Yes.
With being recruitment, obviously, like always the most difficult part of any research process.
Yep.
And then again, now I'm very happy to see like tools that are starting to be a little bit more catching all the functionalities that you need to go through for any research project.
Through that process that you mentioned earlier in the conversation.
Exactly.
That makes so much sense. And I think that the point about the administrative burden of having to manage different tools and licenses and invoices and billing and seats and all of that stuff is an underappreciated part of research ops. And people really think about it as being primarily about kind of research enablement and choosing tool. But there's so much that goes on behind the scenes that is a big burden on teams. But as you mentioned, you're now a customer of Great Question, and we're thrilled to have you with us. But what were some of the trade-offs that you were considering when thinking about, hey, should we go with an all-in-one, or are we better off going with that stack of different research tools to serve every different methodology, to serve every different type of recruit?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I would say...
Is it a great question?
It can be a great question as well. So as I was saying before, for us, the most important is that the key steps of the process are covered by tools, right?
Yes.
Because you need support, especially when it comes to recruitment, and you need support when it comes to moderation and or not, like any sort of methodology. And then analysis and documentation, it's also important, but it's more of a nice to have, and the same with planning, right? So
interesting.
For me, like I have layers of this is a must for a tool, and then there are nice to haves, and then there are delighters, right? So as far as the tool covers the recruitment and the interaction with the user in a way that covers most of our use cases. In our case, we talk with both Miro and non-Miro users.
Yes, absolutely.
So we rely on our own databases to reach out to our users, but we also need to talk to non-Miro users, and that's where panels such as Respondent come handy.
Yes.
But then also, like when you're executing the research, you actually want to run it in a way that has the basics built in. So if you're running an interview and you want your team to join, you don't want them to be all on the call. You want them to be hidden as observers, taking notes, etc. Right. So for us, these are like the very basics of a tool, and the same with unmoderated testing, right? So most of the times we run unmoderated testing to figure out if some parts of the prototypes are usable, if people can find it, etc. So that's also very important for us that the integrations with the tools we use are there, and all that. And then again, if there is like an analysis layer that is way better than what we used to, or kind of reduces the manual work of what you need to do when you get all that information, that's fantastic, right? And then on top of that, if you can store all your insights in the same tool and everyone has access, that's also very
fantastic
good,
as well.
So those are like the things that I consider when kind of choosing between tools.
Yes.
And for example, if with Great Question, I would say that today we feel pretty confident that most of these are covered. And the only reason why we would kind of look into other tools would be in cases that are very specific edge cases. We're trying to talk to people who are not on your panel, or we're trying to run like multi-method study, etc. But if it covers 95% of the use cases in which we run research, I'm more than happy to
keep going with it. That's so interesting. So it's a hierarchy of needs almost, with recruitment at the base, and then you kind of layer up, and analysis is on top. Now, there are two different directions that I could take this, and I'll let you kind of decide which one you'd like to go. So the first one is around that analysis layer, because obviously we're hearing a lot about AI in the research space and how that is helping people speed up the analysis component. And then the second piece is around that 5% edge case scenario that you mentioned. And in that 5% edge case, do you actually take those studies and try and steer them back to the mean and say, well, what's the additional value of doing something that's outside of the norm? And maybe it's a marginal benefit for a lot of cost and a lot of additional complication.
Yeah, we can. So, I think we can tie both up nicely. So let's say, for us, every time we start any net new research, it has to have a justification, you know? Because it's very easy to kind of get excited or think about research as we need to do this as the first thing on the process, which is completely right. But we tend to forget that we have a lot of accumulated knowledge and domain experts that are our researchers or people who've been working on that domain for a long time that can actually help us understand, do we really need to run net new research, right? And then what we like to do in the very beginning is to sit down and like fetch what is the data that we've collected, what are the insights that we already have about the problems, and to really understand, do we know enough about what we're trying to learn? If the answer is yes, here you go. Here are the reports and the data points that you can leverage. Move on. If the answer is no, well, at least we did this exercise, and now we can understand which are like specific questions you have.
And where are the gaps?
Exactly. And that's where analysis is very important, because you rarely want to go to the data, like to the raw data or to the raw information you're collecting for customers. But what I like thinking is some sort of progressive disclosure, meaning you have to have some sort of hierarchy again in how you present the findings, where someone that comes new to a new kind of topic can dive in quick and understand, okay, this is what we know about onboarding, for example. So for that, we're leveraging AI internally as well, and it's very easy for us right now, again, to understand what's the TLDR of a specific topic.
Right.
And then one outcome of that could be, oh, we don't know enough, as I was saying, and sometimes that's like an edge case type of research in which we're like, okay, we know about, we have information about these specific users, but maybe want to learn about these others, whether because we want to invest on, tool expansion in different use cases, or because we're thinking of a different tool set that specific roles could leverage, etc. And that's the only reason in which we would have run this type of research.
So there's a threshold upon which you need to decide, do we have enough information? And if the answer's
that's
yes,
very important.
And it could be a 51% bar or threshold, and you're like, we've got enough for this small decision.
Exactly.
Right.
That's very important. And also
there's proportionate research to the side of the decision or outcome.
And also like what type of research you're thinking about, right? Like if it's more like an evaluative study, the investment on it for an emulated test is very, very, little.
Yes, yeah.
So we don't overthinking that much. Like the designer comes with a new idea, we want to try it out. We run an emulated testing, we got some information, and we kind of enable them to take the decision.
Right.
That's very important. But if we're talking more of foundational or generative research, that's where those questions start to become more important, because you know that probably you're going to triangulate findings, it's going to be a study, it's going to take longer, etc. So you need to actually understand what's the risk of the investment in a way, right? Like one of our researchers is going to spend 1 or 2 months or whatever it takes to kind of dive deep into this area. Do we actually need that?
Yes.
Right? And if so, what is exactly that we want to learn?